The fire burns differently when I must speak of endings. Not the gentle endings of stories told for comfort, but the deliberate endings chosen by those who understand that some victories can only be purchased with the ultimate currency. Tonight's chronicle weighs heavier in my voice than most, for I have witnessed the moment when heroes cease to count the cost of their choices. What unfolds tonight takes place within the Candlekeep's restored sanctuary, where ancient wards create islands of stability in a world gone mad, where maps rewrite themselves and artifacts bear the scars of cosmic battle. Here, the last heroes gather not to plan triumph, but to determine who among them will transform their very life force into the power needed to heal reality's wounds. Steel yourself for the heaviest of truths. For this tale I call The Price of Power, a chronicle of focusing arrays that convert breath into magic, of volunteers who step forward knowing they will not return, and of the moment when salvation itself becomes an act of love so profound that those who offer it redefine the very meaning of heroism. The restored sanctuary of Candlekeep had become an island of stability in a world where reality itself had become negotiable, its ancient wards reinforced by divine intervention to create a space where traditional magical law still operated according to principles that mortal minds could comprehend. Within its walls, the surviving heroes of the Resistance had gathered for what they all understood might be their final council, their faces bearing the marks of trials that had tested not just their courage, but their fundamental understanding of what it meant to be human. The great library's reading rooms had been converted into planning chambers, where maps that constantly rewrote themselves competed for space with artifacts whose properties had been altered by exposure to energies that originated from planes where different laws of physics applied. Scholars worked alongside warriors, their combined efforts focused on developing strategies that could operate effectively in conditions where conventional tactics had become meaningless, and success requires sacrifices that no one was eager to contemplate. Laeral Silverhand stood before a table where crystallized fragments of planar energy served as a three-dimensional map of the chaos that surrounded them, her silver hair now bearing streaks of colour that had never existed in normal spectrum, evidence of exposure to forces that left permanent marks on everything they touched. Her eyes held the accumulated wisdom of centuries, but also a weariness that spoke of burdens that even immortal beings found difficult to bear. "The Alliance has given us windows of opportunity," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber despite the magical interference that had made normal communication unreliable. "Zones of stability where we can operate according to familiar principles. Sanctuaries where our magic will work as we expect it to. But those windows won't last forever, and each one we use draws more attention from forces that are actively working to close them." The assembled heroes represented what remained of organised resistance to the transformation that was sweeping across the continent. Some bore physical scars from battles fought in conditions where the very concept of physical law had become unreliable. Others showed psychological damage from exposure to realities that challenged their fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence. All of them understood that they were facing a crisis that went beyond anything their training or experience had prepared them for. The intelligence reports spread across the table painted a picture of devastation that challenged comprehension. Entire kingdoms had been transformed into something that barely resembled their former selves. Their populations either fled, dead, or converted into components of Tiamat's expanding consciousness. The geographical maps that had once defined the boundaries between nations were useless now, as the landscapes itself had been reshaped according to the principles that served the Dragon Queen's vision rather than natural law. Sir Gareth Dragonbane, his paladin's armour now bearing inscriptions that had appeared spontaneously when divine power flowed through him during the worst moments of the planar collision, spoke for many when he addressed the central challenge they faced.
We know what we need to do. Disrupt the ritual sites that are maintaining the tears between the planes. Find some way to force Tiamat's consciousness back into containment. Restore the barriers that are supposed to keep different realms separate. But we know that attempting any of these things directly will require someone to channel energies that no mortal form can survive.
The silence that followed his words was heavy with implications that none of them wanted to voice directly. The calculations were simple and unforgiving. Success would require magical workings that operated on scales comparable to those being used by their enemies, and such workings demanded more power than any individual could channel and survive. Victory was possible, but it would come at a price that would be measured in the lives of those who chose to pay it. Nim Brightforge, her artificer's workshop now filled with devices that operated according to principles she was still trying to understand, had spent weeks developing technologies that might allow them to channel the necessary energies without immediately destroying those who attempted to use them. Her innovations had pushed the boundaries of what was possible when magical theory was combined with mechanical engineering. But even her most optimistic projections suggested that the survival rate for anyone attempting to use such devices would be virtually zero.
I've managed to create focusing arrays that can distribute the energy load across multiple individuals,
she reported, her voice carrying the clinical precision that marked her as someone who had learned to discuss the terrible possibilities without allowing emotion to cloud her judgment.
The calculations suggest that the group of 12 to 15 volunteers could, theoretically, channel enough power to disrupt a major ritual site. The arrays would allow them to share the energy burden, extending their survival time from seconds to possibly several minutes.
Several minutes? Repeated Snapjaw, the kobold whose small stature had never prevented him from asking the questions that others were afraid to voice.
That enough time to do what need doing? Unknown. We're working with theoretical models that have never been tested under real conditions. The energy levels involved are far beyond anything we've dealt with before, that our predictions become increasingly unreliable. We know the arrays would work for at least the initial phase of any operation, but after that...
She shrugged with the gesture of someone who had pushed her knowledge to its absolute limits. The discussion that followed was unlike any military planning session in recorded history, as the assembled heroes grappled with the strategic questions that had no good answers and tactical challenges that offered only degrees of certain failure. They were not discussing how to achieve victory with acceptable losses, but how to achieve victory at all, regardless of the cost to themselves. Young Linan Swift, now bearing the unofficial title of Speaker for the Lost, in recognition of her role representing the communities that had been destroyed by the cult's activities, raised the question that went to the heart of their moral dilemma. If we're asking people to sacrifice their lives for a chance at stopping this, how do we choose who makes the sacrifice? How do we decide whose death serves the greater good? The question sparked intense debate about the ethics of leadership in situations where victory required certain death from some participants. Some argued that volunteers should be accepted based on their own willingness to serve, regardless of their strategic value. Others contended that such crucial missions should be assigned to those whose skills and knowledge made them most likely to succeed, even if that meant losing irreplaceable individuals. But it was Talis the White, the former cult member whose redemption had become a symbol of hope for others seeking to break free from their past, who provided the perspective that cut through the philosophical complexity to reach the practical core of their dilemma.
"We're thinking about this wrong," she said,
her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been forced to confront hard truths about the nature of sacrifice and serve. "We're not choosing who dies. We're choosing who lives. Every life we save by stopping this transformation is worth the cost of stopping it, no matter how high the cost might be." Her words reframed the entire discussion, shifting the focus from the tragedy of necessary sacrifice to the meaning that such sacrifice could achieve. The heroes were not discussing suicide missions, but rescue operations whose success would be measured in worlds saved rather than lives lost. The planning that followed was driven by this new understanding, as teams began to form around the most critical targets in the cult's network of ritual sites. Each team would require individuals with specific skills and knowledge, but also the psychological strength to function effectively while knowing that their mission was almost certainly a one-way journey. The primary assault would target the Well of Dragons itself, where Severin's transformed consciousness served as a focal point for the entire planar collision. Destroying the central ritual site would not immediately restore normal reality, but it would destabilize the network that was maintaining the tears between planes, creating opportunities for the other teams to succeed in their own missions. Sir Gareth volunteered immediately for the primary assault, his divine connection to Torm providing him with the resistance to the kind of psychological corruption that had converted so many others into servants of Tiamat's will. His experience in maintaining his faith, despite devastating personal losses, had prepared him for the kind of spiritual challenges that would be involved in confronting a manifestation of divine evil. Remallia Haventree, the Harper agent whose intelligence work had revealed the true scope of the cult's plans, would lead the team targeting the communication networks that coordinated activities between the different ritual sites. Her skills in infiltration and her knowledge of the cult's operational methods made her ideally suited for missions that required precision and stealth under impossible conditions. Eldara Moonwhisper, the druid whose innovations had proven effective against magical corruption, accepted responsibility for the mission targeting the sites where the natural world was being transformed into something that could no longer support normal life. Her understanding of the relationship between magical energies and biological systems gave her the best chance of reversing changes that threatened to make vast regions permanently uninhabitable. The artificer, Nim Brightforge, would coordinate the technological aspects of all the missions, her devices providing the focusing arrays and energy distribution systems that would make it possible for the mortal beings to channel the power necessary for their success. She understood better than anyone else that her innovations were essentially elaborate ways of managing the process of converting human life force into magical energy. But she also understood that such conversion was the only way to generate enough power to counter what the cult had achieved. As the teams finalized their preparations, each member faced the personal challenge of deciding what meaning they wanted their sacrifice to carry. Some wrote letters to family members they would never see again. Others spent time in meditation or prayer, seeking to find peace with choices that could not be undone. The most difficult conversations were with those who would remain behind in the sanctuary, the individuals whose survival was considered essential for rebuilding whatever world might exist after the crisis ended. These people would bear the responsibility of preserving the knowledge and values that the sacrifice of others had protected, ensuring that the price paid for victory would result in something worth preserving. On the final night before the mission began, the assembled heroes gathered for a ceremony that was part military send-off and part funeral service. They spoke not of glory or heroism, but of the simple human values that made their sacrifice meaningful. Love for their communities, responsibility for future generations, and the stubborn refusal to surrender hope, even when hope seemed objectively irrational. Langdadrosa Cyanrath, The redeemed champion whose transformation had inspired others to choose their own paths towards redemption, spoke for many when he addressed the gatherings in words that carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "We go not as conquerors seeking glory, but as guardians seeking to preserve something more precious than our own lives. We go knowing that our names may be forgotten, but trusting that our actions will be remembered in the simple fact that tomorrow still exists for those who come after us." As dawn broke over Candlekeep, painting the ancient towers in light that seemed somehow brighter and more meaningful than any sunrise in recent memory, the teams prepared to disperse to their various targets. They carried with them not just weapons and magical devices, but the accumulated hopes of everyone who still believed that the world was worth fighting for. The price of power had been calculated, and those who were willing to pay it had stepped forward. The final phase of the war for reality itself was about to begin, and for the first time since the crisis started, victory seemed possible. Not because the odds had improved, but because there were still people willing to sacrifice everything to protect something larger than themselves. The sanctuary of the Candlekeep watched them go with walls that had witnessed the departure of heroes throughout history, but never under circumstances where the very concept of history hung in the balance. The price of power would be paid in full, and from that payment would come either the restoration of the world or its final transformation into something unrecognizable. The choice now lay with those who had volunteered to make the ultimate sacrifice, and the dawn that broke over their departure carried with it either the light of salvation or the last glimpse of a world that would soon cease to exist. And so, this tale draws to a close. Though its echoes may linger in your dreams, the fire burns lower now. But don't despair. I've countless more stories waiting to be shared with you. If this tale stirred something within you, if it reminded you why magic still matters in this mundane world, then please light your own beacon. That glowing thumbs up tells the spirits of story that our fellowship grows stronger. Subscribe to join our circle permanently, and ring that notification bell. That way, you'll know the moment I return with new chronicles. The fire burns brightest when more souls gather around it. Wouldn't you agree? Now, if that's the case, share this tale with another weary soul who needs it, reminding them adventure still exists. Tag a friend who would appreciate a good story by the fire. The more who believe, the more real these worlds become. And if you're new to our hearth, explore the playlist of chronicles that I've gathered. Tales of heroes and villains, love and loss, magic and mystery. Each one carefully chosen for souls like yours. Until the fire calls us together again, may your own adventures be worthy of legend. And may you never lose the wonder that brought you here tonight. Travel or sleep well, brave soul. The long rest awaits your return.